Good evening. For those who haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Mike Moe. I'm co-founder of GSV. On behalf of my partners at GSV, I want to welcome you to the 6th annual ASU GSV Education Innovation Summit. You know, it's amazing. When we started this in 2010, we had 250 people. This year we'll have over 2,500 people. And one of the reasons I believe this event has such traction is because there's a lot of great education conferences, but here, what I think the hallmark of this summit is that people come together to make things happen, to accelerate innovation, to make dramatic change in education. And I want to thank you for being here for that. And you guys are clapping way too politely. Let's get a little bit more energy in this room, for crying out loud. I want to thank all our partners, but in particular, Arizona State University, who's been an amazing partner over these last 6 summits. Not only are they clearly the largest public university in the United States, but by my view, and I think many people's view, the most innovative and the ones that have taken the most action. And so we want to applaud them and Michael Crow, the president. I don't know if he's here, I haven't seen him. Again, you get a little more energy. But anyway, here we go. So what I want to do tonight is really provide a framework for the summit over the next few days. Clearly we've got amazing speakers. We've got 270 companies presenting. But really what I want us to be focused on, we've tried to really take the ideas of the last summits, things that we pulled together, and really put an aspirational target out there, what we call our 2020 vision, and the march towards that vision. So you see a lot of the theme around the subjects that we're discussing over the next few days is aligned with this 2020 vision and the march. And so I want to give you some framework behind that. To look ahead, I think often it's easy or instructive to go backwards. So if you look at the circle of life 500 years ago, it basically was your parents' past equaled your future. You know, for most people, you died within 5 miles of where you were born. And essentially your social, economic, and geographic mobility was 0. But then, something happened. Really a tidal wave of innovation and technology hit the shores of civilization. First was the Gutenberg press in 1439, Watt steam engine, telephone, planes, trains, automobiles, all making the world healthier, wealthier, and wiser. Human population exploded as people lived longer, driven by better medicine and technology. Global wealth went parabolic with this technology as a catalyst. And education attainment dramatically increased across the population during that period of time, which really created the tailwind for the American century, which went from 1900 to 2000, which saw the most prosperous creation of standard of living in world history. GDP per capita, the best proxy for standard of living, went up 4x in the first 75 years of the American century, with the fundamentals of that being education, attainment, which went up 13-fold, innovation, entrepreneurship proxied by patent growth over 15x during that 75 period, 6-fold increase in immigration, and inequality dropped by over 50% during that first 75 years of the American century. So effectively, you had soaring opportunity and plummeting inequality. And that was really the recipe behind the growth. Last year I made the point, old MacDonald had a point, which was E-I-E-I-O. The fundamentals of this amazing American century was education, innovation, entrepreneurship, immigration, opportunity. And that really was the framework behind the success. Then in the mid-1970s, something happened. The brakes were put on these significant fundamentals. And what's transpired, the baby boomer generation was the most educated in the world. The millennials, the 18 to 35-year-olds now, are in the middle of the pack from an education standpoint. Inequality is, as President Obama, probably the greatest issue of our time. We've seen inequality increase 3x during the past since 1975, last 40 years. Another data point for that, CEO compensation is now 270 times the average worker. That's a 13-fold increase in the last 40 years. When you look at education in terms of access, what's happened is, and if you look at the most elite schools, most competitive schools, 75% of those students come from the 25 top household incomes. So in other words, these elite colleges that turn out the next CEOs and the next judges and the next representatives are all basically being perpetuated from higher income families. And when you look at the bottom quartile of household incomes in America, you only have an 8% probability that you're going to graduate from college, any college. So for the first time in this country's history, there's been no upward mobility. Effectively, if you were born poor, you're going to stay poor. So we've come full circle. The future is determined by how well you select your parents, and that's wrong. So I don't believe it's too dramatic to say that we think our whole democracy is at risk. You can't have a society, a democracy, where fewer and fewer people have the opportunity to participate in the future, that are playing an unfair system, where ultimately you have a majority of people that basically feel like they're being left out. This is a recipe for revolution. And we think, education is a key foundation for that answer. So we could either take this sort of, what some would say is this inevitable fall from influence and success that we've seen many great societies before, going through this historical arc. Or we can say, no, we can do something about it. Why can't we do something about it? And so last fall, we brought together over 100 leaders in the education industry to Beaver Creek to really focus on what could be done to drive changes in education to solve this issue, to create better opportunity for all. And so one of the things that we said is a foundational truth that we had going into this gathering that we had at Beaver Creek is the fundamental belief that talent is equally distributed by zip code, but unfortunately, opportunity is not. We also had as an attitude, not all the reasons why something can't be done, but what needs to be done and how do we get around those roadblocks to make that happen. So we started with phrases to get rid of. And with the phrases to get rid of, we included the beginning saying, no offense, but. Because as I've learned from my daughters, my youngest, Caroline's in the audience tonight. She's at City Year and going to be at KIP next fall in Washington, D.C. Let's give her a hand. Again, more energy. But one of the things that they always say to me just before they're about to offend me is, no offense, but. So no offense, but education's different. No offense, but poor kids can't learn. No offense, but things move slowly in education. Great idea, but there's no money in education. The sales cycle is too long. No offense, but education isn't supposed to be entertaining. Schools will never give you the data. No offense, but changes in education are incremental. It's impossible to scale in education. No offense, but teachers don't care about financial rewards and incentives. Do they, Caroline? No offense, but schools have already tried that. No offense, but the unions won't allow it. If it's such a good idea, why hasn't it been done already? Those were the things that we said we eliminated. We're going to focus on solutions. An example of an entrepreneur that focused on what needed to be done, whatever it took to be done, I love is Fred Smith, who is the founder of Federal Express. The story goes, when he was at Yale University, he wrote a paper about this new overnight delivery service that he was quite excited about. His Yale professor wasn't so excited, and in fact, he gave him a C and said, in order to earn better than a C, the idea must be feasible. Well, thankfully, Fred Smith didn't take that as a reason not to do it. In fact, he took his family inheritance as well as raised some venture capital, and he launched Federal Express. Only to find, like many entrepreneurs, many startups, it took more time and more money than he had originally forecast. And so he went back to his backers for more capital, and they said, no, go. You're kind of got what you've got. So like any great entrepreneur, he did what they would do. He took the last $5,000 that he had, and he went to Las Vegas on Friday night, played blackjack all weekend, made $27,000 at the blackjack table, and Federal Express flew on Monday. The rest is history, $47 billion market cap. There is a magic of thinking big. Andrew Carnegie, one of the great stories in all of history, in my view. People know as a Scottish immigrant who came to America with not 2 cents to rub together, started America's first billion-dollar corporation, which when it became sold into U.S. Steel, he took his wealth and he used a lot of it for education. Obviously, over 3,000 Carnegie libraries, Carnegie Mellon University, Carnegie Hall. But a story that a lot of people don't know is he commissioned a young author, Napoleon Hill, to go around the world to study the attributes of leaders of society and civilization. What made these people great? How did they achieve what they were able to achieve? So 25 years later, Napoleon Hill came back with the answer to this, and he boiled it down to one sentence, and that was whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. That was the formula for success. We were lucky enough to have the modern day Napoleon Hill, Jim Collins, come to Beaver Creek to work with us for a half a day to really focus on how do we address these challenges to create the opportunities that we felt were critical to transform education so we weren't going to be victim to this inevitable fall. And he was fantastic. So if you know Jim Collins' work, he studies what makes companies great. He said one of the characteristics is what he calls a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. Great companies have big, hairy, audacious goals that inspire them, get them up every morning, motivate them to do important things. Another concept that Jim Collins focuses on is what's called paired research. So he looks at, basically, if you saw Trading Places, this was paired research, but he studies why one guy is great and another person doesn't achieve the success. And another piece that he really focused on is that these changes don't happen overnight. It's this relentless, disciplined pursuit against these big, hairy, audacious goals that over a long period of time, big things happen. So an example of what we refer to as a 20-mile march is the race to the South Pole in 1911. And in that period of time, explorations were a big thing. The explorers were effectively the rock stars of the day, discovering new lands, finding new territories, and nobody had ever gone to the South Pole before. So in 1911, you had Roald Amundsen from Norway, go Norway, against Robert Falcon Scott of Great Britain. And this was a race to the South Pole. This race is 1,400 miles. To give you some context how far that is, it's from Miami to Boston. This year, it'd be just like going to Boston. Amundsen trained using Eskimos. Scott, who was a very experienced, famous explorer, basically just relied on his past experience, which was vast, but never to the South Pole. Amundsen used sled dogs. Scott used ponies. The key difference, though, here's their diaries. On December 5th, 1911, Scott's journal. I doubt if any party could travel in such weather. What did Amundsen say on the very same day? It's been an unpleasant day, storm drift and frostbite, but we advanced closer to our goal. Scott took what the weather gave him. Amundsen did a 20-mile march, 70 days, same thing, whether it was snowing or whether it was bright out, 20-mile march. What was the result? Amundsen was the first to the South Pole. What happened to Scott? He and his entire party perished. So to sum it up, Jim Collins says, greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. Here's another example of a 20-mile march. This is Gordon Moore, who's famous for being the originator of Moore's Law, which, interestingly, he came up with 50 years ago, 1965. And so in Moore's Law, what he postulated basically was that computing power would double every 2 years. And in fact, if you look what's happened, over the last 50 years, computing power has increased almost unbelievably. The cost of computing has fallen to almost zero, plummeted. Cost of storage, essentially free and unlimited. So if the automobile industry had those same changes, a Ford Taurus that cost $20,000 in 1990 would be less than $1 today, and you'd throw it away after you drove it. So Moore's law, interestingly enough, wasn't a scientific or physical law. It was really a conjecture. Effectively, what Gordon Moore did was impose his will on the technology industry and mapped out what could happen. And you look at over 50 years, it's truly unbelievable, not just on the technology industry, but in society overall. So back to Beaver Creek, we created our BHAG, our Big, Hairy, Audacious goal. And that was to ensure that every person in the country, and ultimately the world, has an equal opportunity to participate in the future. We think that's a fundamental right. We also, in terms of our 20-mile march, we said, what were the signposts going to be on the highway? What were the key fundamentals to reach that destination? And you've seen the program over the next couple of days is really focused on the key issues that we determined was how we're going to solve this problem by 2020. And the tailwinds at the back of this industry that we wanted to focus on to accelerate our growth really are on these megatrends. Return on education, you've heard us talk about before, which is a key megatrend that influences opportunities that we think is the key thing to focus on. This is about outputs, not inputs. It's about not your corporate structure, but how efficacious you are with people learning. Kaizen EDU, continuous learning, this idea that in this knowledge-based economy, you're no longer going to be able to fill up your knowledge tank to age 25 and drive off through life. You're going to continually need to replenish the knowledge that you have. Knowledge is a currency. It's about what you know, not where you go. It's about knowledge, not college, creating personalized knowledge portfolios. Hollywood meets Harvard, looking at the entertainment industry from all sorts of aspects, from engagement to business model to how you scale. We think that's an important concept. Big data, crucial. Providing powerful analytics to prescribe, to diagnose, to create transparency. And lastly, mobile. Clearly, anytime, anywhere learning is a foundation, fundamental of a go-forward society. So in terms of these pillars, we have 10 of them, just so you kind of know when the speech is going to be done. Number one, we call it baby steps, or equal access to early learning. Malcolm Gladwell, in his Outlier book, gives a great example of, in hockey crazy Canada, the way that the leagues are determined is when you're 5 years old, you get selected to be in a league by your ability. And so your cohort is by the year you were born. So if somebody born in 2005, your cohort was everybody born in 2005 between January and December. The problem with that, at age 5, somebody born in January has lived 20% longer than somebody born in December. They're going to likely be larger. They're likely to be more mentally developed. All these aspects. And so guess what happens? When you look at the elite teams and midgets in Canada, they're born in January, February, and March, predominantly. And so those kids basically get better coaches, better access to the rinks. They get told they're great, and by the way, the kids that don't get selected are being told the opposite. And so by the time you hit the NHL, this is what it looks like in Canada. Not a shock. Basically it goes down everywhere you're born. You say, well, that's stupid. I mean, that's not fair. And of course it is ridiculous. But what's even more ridiculous and has far greater consequences is that you look at 52% of kids that come from low-income families in America come into kindergarten not ready to learn. And what does that mean? You're basically starting from behind, and when you start from behind, it's likely that you never catch up. In fact, you're 50% more likely to be placed in special ed, you're 25% more likely to drop out of high school, you're 40% more likely to become a teen parent, you're 16% more likely to skip college, You're 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. Even more kind of crazy is you look at that 85% of the human brain is developed before age 5, but 98% of education spending is after the age of 5. Another interesting fact when people say, well, that's expensive. How are you going to fix it? Well, actually, $1 invested in pre-K returns $7 plus in return. Pretty good. An example of a solution, Waterford Institute here is a not-for-profit, has been able to, in Utah, show where they've been able to deliver highly effective pre-K learning at 20% of Head Start cost with significantly positive returns. So again, we're going to get into much more in terms of the solutions, but we're creating a framework here tonight. Number 2, stepping up, develop and elevate transformational school leaders. We believe strongly that leaders create leverage. 2 months ago here in Phoenix, they had the 49th Super Bowl. Here we got Pete Carroll, who was the coach of the Seattle Seahawks. You have Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots. These guys don't have much in common, but one interesting fact. They both share the same football father, which was our Lifetime Achievement winner last year, Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz was their first coach, each of their first coaches. What's amazing was you look at the National Football Championship for college football, Urban Meyer also, his football father was Lou Holtz, and Urban Meyer has sired 12 Division I football coaches, and if you know anything about Division I football, there's not that many Division I football teams. Going back to Lou Holtz, his father, football father, was the fiery Ohio State coach, Woody Hayes, who had the great quote, "Without winners, there wouldn't even be civilization." Woody Hayes was the football father also to Bo Schembechler, which makes Woody Hayes the grandfather of Jim Harbaugh, and also the grandfather of LSU's coach, Les Miles. Altogether, these coaches produced 11 national championships and 5 Super Bowl championships. Look into business, same principle. Steve Jobs of Apple, huge stable of great leaders that came from there. Bill Campbell, who's been here in the past. Bill, they call the coach of Silicon Valley. If you look at the people that he's mentored, have been under his tutelage, it's everybody from Jeff Bezos to Dan Rosensweig, who's here tonight, Larry Page, Mark Andreessen, Dick Costolo from Twitter, Ben Horowitz. I mean, just amazing amount of leverage those leaders have created. So if you look at the Apple family tree, it's 1.5 trillion of market value. Truly staggering. Leaders create leverage. How does that work in the school market? Principal, you got 1. On average, a principal has 37 teachers. That influences 630 students. That's leverage. Problem, annual principal churn is 33%. The time required for a principal to implement a plan is 5 years. And the average principal tenure is 2.8 years. Some solutions, new leaders, which has now worked with 1,600 principals to develop, which has impacted 350,000. Woo! 350,000 impoverished, difficult difficult circumstances has been an amazing success. You look at models like West Point in the military. Again, thinking about could we have a national leadership academy develop principals and leaders in schools. CorpU in the corporate training space works with $20 billion of corporate training spend focused on excellence in leadership. Number 3, milestone, stepping out. National service is a force multiplier. Having a mentor, you get 2 times more likely that you're going to enroll in college. If you look at the counseling world, there's 500 students for every counselor. 33% lack any mentor at all. And you look at the schools, there's 1,359 schools in America which are essentially dropout factories where 50% or more of the students coming into those schools drop out. If you looked in the medical world, if you looked at a hospital, the 50% of the patients that came into a hospital died, they'd close down the hospital. Here, what we do is we basically are producing living dead, and they bring in the next class. That doesn't make sense. Teach for America, with wildly impactful today, 11,000 core members, 750,000 students they're reaching. City Year, we have Michael Brown here tomorrow, phenomenal program. Salesforce in the corporate world with our one 1-1 program, 1% of their pre-tax profits, 1% of their time, and 1% of their products going to help make a difference. I mentor, technology program, make a little presentation in front of the group tomorrow, has shown that 75% of the students that have an iMentor go off to college. Again, very difficult circumstances. Number 4, step on it. This is using technology to accelerate learning. Here's a story about Prince Henry of Portugal. You might know he was one of the first venture capitalists ever. So what he did was he said, okay, for a strategic advantage, I'm going to invest in technology. I'm going to invest in research and development. And he created this research institute in the flat Earth society of the day, which is literally on the end of the Earth, to study the greatest ways to navigate, the greatest ways to sail. And by 1450, they came up with this idea of the caravel, which transformed sailing. You could now sail into wind India, wind against it, wind to the side. Basically, it let Portugal, which is smaller than the size of Indiana, by the way, where the national championship is being played right now. Anyway, sorry. Basically ruled the world. They ruled the world because they controlled the seas, from India to South America, and it was ultimately the caravel that Columbus ship sailed to America. It was a Magellan sailed across the Cape of Good Hope. So, transformative. If you look at money, though, it's money that doesn't buy happiness. We showed this chart before. There's no correlation between money spent and educational outcomes by PISA score. Technology does buy happiness. There's a direct correlation between PISA score and broadband availability in a country. Example of technology accelerant, Jose Ferraro from Newton with the Newton platform, and I hope you've paid attention to what they've been announcing. They delivered 15 billion individualized lessons to 7 million students, truly creating individualized adaptive learning. Jesse Willie Wilson here, pictured here with Bill Gates at Dreambox. They're delivering 5 million individual lessons teaching math by playing a game. Every single click becoming more individualized for what that student needs. Number 5, milestone new models. This goal is to create access, improve quality with new models. Back to our destination, our big, hairy, audacious goal. Where do we need to go? Everybody has the opportunity to participate in the future. And one of the biggest issues for that is cost, access. How do we think about new models that can get everybody to have the opportunity to get to the knowledge that they need? You going back to prehistoric times, theater, was how people shared stories, how they entertained. But the problem with the theater model was, it was access. You had to be where the production was going on. Cost, certainly today, Broadway or the West End to go to a play cost an arm and a leg. Consistency, if you have a stand-in or just the whole variance of a production every single night, it's not as consistent. All of a sudden, you have this disruptive technology, the camera, the movie camera, and now the film industry is born, television, everything else. Netscape, innovating off of innovation, basically has created a business where you can have anything that you want, anytime you want it, for $7.99 from an entertainment standpoint. And using that scaled leverage that they have, they can create an incredible production like House of Cards for the cost of $100 million just by getting 2 million new subscribers. So if you look at Netflix, the market cap is $25 billion, which is 50% greater than the largest education company. Netflix was started in 1999. Disney, the juggernaut in entertainment, has a $180 billion market cap, which is 3 times greater than the top 10 education companies combined. We think there's a continuum between news and knowledge. Google, the king of information. Harvard, the king of education, arguably. But what's interesting about Google to me is if they would have charged even 1 penny per click, certainly Google wouldn't be a verb today, and it certainly wouldn't have a $365 billion market cap. Also, when you look at YouTube, which is equal in terms of size of the 10 top largest education companies in terms of market value, again, it's creative, using new models, and think of entertainment. An example of a new model is Coursera, which is a leader in the MOOC space. 12 million students on its platform, 114 institutions, 550 classes, 70 of them which are on demand today. That's a new model. Number 6, we call it the March. Strength through diversity. Going back to leaders, I obviously was influenced by one. When Coach Holtz came to the University of Minnesota, he said, the heart and soul of the team will come from Minnesota, but the arms and legs are going to come from somewhere else. And that was diversity. We needed diversity to compete. The same is true in every aspect of society and business. McKinsey just came out with this study showing the companies in the top quartile for diversity are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. Yet just 5% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are minorities. 17% of Fortune 500 board members are women. 10% of African American and Hispanic tech workers in Silicon Valley. 23% of female tech workers in Silicon Valley. Yet 65% of new businesses are started by women. Yet, in just an unbelievable statistic, only 8% of venture capital funding is secured by women. In the education industry, I'm proud to tell you, I believe it's something like 35%, but it's still not enough. 1% of venture capital funding is secured by African Americans, and not a shock, 76% of venture capitalists are white, male, and I'm here standing as accused. Just a quick kind of visualization that we have. If you know, in the 1970s, in the top 10 orchestras in America, you basically had 0 female players. And then they started this new idea of blind auditions. And what happened, not surprisingly, was that basically you saw the females started to get selected, now approaching 50%. The model is, how do we create transparency? How do we create, through big data and through being able to effectively look at skills, ability, aptitudes, opportunity, work ethic, create the opportunities for all so they have the equal opportunity to participate in the future. Number 7, Stepladders, preparing a modern workforce. And this is just a fundamental that we all know, but it's still just so key to kind of get your head around on what we need to do in terms of innovate and accelerate solutions. So when the current education system was created around 1900, 70% of the workforce was either in agriculture or manufacturing, industrial. This old system, which we currently live with, is you basically played from 0 to 5, you learned from 5 to 25, you worked from 25 to 65, you retired after 65. By 2020, it's expected that 95% of all jobs are going to be in services and information based. 3 out of 10 people born today are going to live to be 100 years or older. It's expected that the millennials coming to the workforce today are going to have 15 different careers between now and the time that they retire. Jobs are being surveyed left and right. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, came out with a new book called The Alliance, which is great. And he talks in this book about this modern relationship between workers and employers. And effectively talking about what he calls these tours that the new worker is going to go on, where they're basically doing a tour of duty to get an experience, and they're going to go off their next tour, and what that alliance means in terms of what they're looking for. And one of the big things they're looking for is not only experience, but education. So figuring out how that's going to work in this modern relationship, we think, is critical. So this new system that is the reality of the day is you're going to basically learn from the time you're born until you retire, if you ever retire. An example of a modern solution for this modern workforce, General Assembly, which has grown incredibly. We'll have an alumni group. What General Assembly does, if you don't know, they call themselves a technical school for the Ivy League, but what they teach is modern skills such as coding and computer design and so forth. And by the end of this year, they're going to have an alumni group, and they were started 4 years ago, larger than Harvard's. Linda, of course, being a subscription service for modern skills, doing incredibly well. Number 8, open it up. This is create an open, personalized knowledge portfolio. Thinking about really breaking up the system and creating what you need to learn to be effective and to create opportunities for yourself. Just a quick example of a closed system. BlackBerry, not even 10 years ago, BlackBerry was the coolest technology company in the world. In fact, the people that used it were so addicted to it, they called them crackberries. Remember that? And then Apple came out in 2007 with the iPhone and created the App Store where you could have hundreds of thousands of personalized apps exactly for what I wanted on my personal computer that I carried in my pocket. And so in 2007, the market cap for BlackBerry and Apple here's a paired example, was approximately $70 billion for each company. Obviously today, Apple's up tenfold, BlackBerry's down 95%. Matt Patinsky at Parchment, talking about this open system, how we're going to create knowledge as a currency and organizing this digital marketplace. Parchment's a great example of this. They're taking over 12 million electronic transcripts today, but creating this marketplace to basically create a currency around learning. Degree's another example of a company addressing this issue. Smarter, another one. Number 9, March Madness, using the world's best ideas. This is John Sperling, who was the founder of Apollo Group and the University of Phoenix, who died last fall at age 93. Quite an innovator, an entrepreneur. But one of the things he did is he loved his cat. And so he spent a bunch of money cloning his cat, and he called his cat Copycat when it actually was, when he was actually able to produce it. But copying or imitating has actually been a pretty important ingredient for innovating. In fact, when you look at this global innovation map, and this is historical, it's changing. We really are creating a global Silicon Valley. It used to be in London, risk isn't my cup of tea. In New York City, the attitude was, well, if it's such a good idea, why hasn't it been done already? In Minneapolis, where I grew up, the attitude is, well, it looks promising, let's test it for a while. Come out to Silicon Valley, can I write you a check? Shanghai, great idea. Now it's my idea. Carry limousine was synonymous with chauffeured limousine service. And it's 1921, and interesting if you look at their model, what they were is they were a network. They didn't own any of their own cars. They had a brand. Carry was a brand around the world. They had an 800 number where you scheduled your ride, and it went pretty well. What they failed to do is they failed to imagine. So when you look at this, Uber, which was started 2 years after the iPhone, they were able to take imitation, imagination, innovation, and today have a $41 billion market value. They don't have their cars, they have a brand, they have an app. That's their business. And they become the fastest growing company in the history of the world. Kodak, synonymous with photography, 1888, there's never more photographs taken. Yet in that environment, Kodak's bankrupt. Snapchat started the same year that Kodak went bankrupt. $15 billion market value today and no revenues. Hyatt, 1957 started, $9 billion market value. Airbnb started 50 years later, 2008, $13 billion value. These powerful new models that can be leveraged, the digital tracks have been laid over the past 20 years. The smartphones, the app economy, all this with imagination, imitation, innovation can create enormous solutions and success. So platforms, just to talk about Facebook, founded in 2004, and I want you to think about this and how this can be compared to the education industry. $230 billion market value, 1.4 billion members. Again, as a country, it's the largest country in the world. You say, the new way of thinking, Facebook really is, it has its own language, it has its own marketplace, it has its own currency. It's basically a sovereign nation of itself, and it's the largest in the world. We mentioned Coursera before. It's a network, and by the way, it's growing faster than Facebook did in its first couple years. Professional Graph, LinkedIn, 300 million students, started in 2003, 32 billion market cap. Chegg started in 2005, $663 million market cap, 15 million students on their network. Lyft, by the way, I hope you all are using the Lyft service. We're an investor, a great company, peer-to-peer, 2012, started $2.5 billion valuation in just a couple years. Course Hero started in Andrew Grauer's dorm room at Cornell in 2006, peer-to-peer sharing service, growing like crazy, 5 million students on its network. Again, reinventing, rethinking how education can be done. Software as a service, Workday, 16 billion market value. 2U, started in 2008. I'm proud to say last week became a $1 billion market value business. Everybody should give applause for that. And it's created, by the end of this year, $1 billion of revenue for its partners. Last milestone, brain research. The Human Genome Project was started in 1990, $3.7 billion, and 13 years later, using cognitive science to optimize learning. The Human Genome Project is maybe the most important medical march ever. And what's been accomplished is remarkable. When they finished the project in 2003, it cost $100 million to do one human genome. Right now, it's about $100 on its way to $1. The implications of that in terms of medicine and how we're going to cure disease and how we're going to address genetic issues is transformative. The brain is the final frontier. Brain research, brain training, brain retraining, cognitive learning. This is going to have a dramatic impact, and we need to accelerate that. We need to have a march like we did in the Human Genome Project. Moore's Law, we saw with the transformation over a long period of time. We don't have that much time, but we do have that march in us. This might sound a little immodest. It was supposed to be funny. It's not so funny as I'm standing up in front of you, but I call it Moore's Law. And Moore's Law in the education industry is looking at this ROE, return on education, and educational impact equals IRR. And so the companies that get the capital and are going to be the ones that are the most transformative are the ones that generate the greatest educational impact. And we think that's important. We think that's a foundation for how we're going to see transformation come in this industry. So over the next couple of days, we just are so excited about what's in front of us. We have, in keynote speakers, some of the most important people in the world doing the most important things. So we have determination, which is our next speakers, Nick Kristof and Cheryl Dunn. We've got motivation, and I encourage everybody to be at the talk tomorrow morning with Dov Seidman about how, and it's really about how, not why, and how the important businesses are going to be created in the future. I promise you're in for a treat, so don't miss that. We have perspiration with Soul Cycle. This is a concept I call mind, body, and soul. And besides it being just a phenomenal workout, it taps into a number of aspects that I think are part of the citizens of the future. And I'll make a challenge to you all. I will be at the piano bar until it closes tonight, and I will be at the 6 a.m. Soul Cycle class tomorrow if you want to join me in the Dove's talk. We have inspiration with Common tomorrow night. I think he inspired us all. I think the movie Selma inspired us all. We have aspiration. There's nobody that points to a more world that could be than Howard Schultz from Starbucks. We have transformation. Vinod Khosla has either founded or invested in 10 companies that have been worth $1 billion or more. In fact, several of those companies have been worth $10 billion or more. There is not a more creative, impactful, legendary venture capitalist than Vinod. And imagination. Richard Branson, dyslexic, was turned down by 53 banks before this first Virgin company was funded, started 8 $1 billion businesses. So we think we're in for some real treats. So our 2020 vision, equal opportunity to participate in the future. And we think that is something that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, but we think with all the help of the people in this room, we can get there. So what I'd love to do now is we're going to have a quick little announcement before I introduce Carlos and Nick and Cheryl. We've got a very important announcement that we're going to make with GSV Labs, which is our innovation labs, with Nancy Liu, who is the general manager for the for our Ed Lab. We also have John Galvin, who is VP and general manager of Intel Education, and my very good friend and Intel board member, David Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Good evening. So to help realize the 2020 vision, I'm excited to announce the newest member of the GSV family, Gsv Labs. We're an acceleration center with a focus on education technology located in the heart of Silicon Valley. Our EdTech Innovation Lab is providing a platform of powerful resources to help us identify and accelerate the most promising companies making the biggest impact on education, the companies we call the stars of tomorrow. We are thrilled to come out the gates with a community of nearly 30 EdTech startups, a network of seasoned mentors and advisors, and key corporate partners. In particular, today, we're happy to announce a partnership with Intel, which I'll ask Dave Patrick, board member of both GSV Labs and Intel, to share more about.
Thank you, Nancy. We're very excited. I'm very excited being a board member of Intel and a board member of GSV Labs to see this partnership come together. Intel is very, very committed to education. We believe a world of More educated people are going to be more users of technology. It's a great fit for our big data initiatives. It's just a great way for us to do business and also make a difference in the world. John Galvin here next to me is our leader of our educational initiatives, so I'll have him go next and tell you all about what we're doing.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Nancy. I'm very excited to be here this evening and announce what we're doing together. Very happy to have GSV Labs as our partner. We will be locating our program in their amazing facility in Redwood City, so close to our headquarters. At Intel, we have a history of partnerships. We partner with our large OEMs, software vendors, and we have a history of partnering in education. We saw a picture of Gordon Moore. Gordon, our founder, really instilled a passion for education in the company, one that really still survives today. Over the past 10 years, we've invested $1 billion in education. That's time from our employees spending in their communities, working with teachers, where we've trained over 12 million teachers around the world on how to bring technology into their classrooms in over 100 countries. And we know that innovation and technology in the classrooms really will make a difference. It is transformational. We've seen that. And we want to continue that path to innovation by working on a new accelerator where we can bring companies in, we can bring mentors to them, we can essentially bring business practices to them, people from outside of Intel as well as people inside of Intel. The application went live today. We'll essentially keep it up through May 22nd. We'll make our selection in July, and then we'll run a 4.5-month program that will end the first week of December. We couldn't really be more excited about what we're doing together.